Hey guys, Brett Legwood from Brett's Property Rants.
And Charlene Ding from Homes in the Lion City.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you.
So today what we're going to be covering is the Singapore private property outlook for 2022. So what are your thoughts?
So, the Singapore economy is slated to grow 3 to 5% this year. However, there's several headwinds. The first would be inflation, which is seen around the world.
Which is already, we're already seeing in our food bills and things like that, I think. And I think that's going to continue, definitely, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And interest rate hikes, yes. Yeah. And of course, Omicron. So it's a little bit of uncertainty because it's spreading all over the world. But we've seen some countries kind of resolve it.
Yeah.
So
I think because it's not as deadly, you're seeing a lot of more opening up. And so therefore, I think the economies that recover the quickest are going to be the ones that open up the quickest.
Yes.
But then that may also backfire, as it has done in the past with the Delta variant. But I guess, we're just going to play it as we see it. And obviously, there's powers that be that control that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why the home prices this year in 2022 might not be as buoyant as 2021, where Singapore did really well. Even towards the end of the year with the borders opening, there was a lot of optimism, but that has kind of died down a little bit. And of course, with the government's new cooling measures, which was a buzz, the whole of December, that has kind of, other people have taken a wait and see approach. Right, so
it is amazing. I'm always amazed at how fast they come in with these measures. They give no warning. They come in and they do them. But in some ways, look, I work on the investment side of property, and so it's a bit of a pain in the bum with that. But the positive thing is actually from a getting first-time buyers on the ladder and getting that. Between HDBs and these cooling measures, actually. The measures are really quite effective compared to what other countries do that have massive problems with, house price growth and getting people on the ladder and that sort of stuff. Singapore really is a beacon of light for most other countries. And, I often joke when I'm in the UK, talking about HDBs, and people can't believe that they've got a system like that because it's public housing has totally failed. In the UK, it just isn't fit for purpose. But but here it is, and I guess as much as an investor, it's like I don't want the cooling measures, I don't like the stamp duties and the ABSDs and things like that, TDSRs, but they serve their purpose and they do tend to work.
Yes. However, this round of cooling measures doesn't really affect majority of the home buyers, I would say. It leaves out the genuine home buyers who are looking to upgrade, the first timers, because the ABSD, the additional buyer stamp duty, it remains the same for them. So which demographic, which segment of the market is really hit? It's really the investors, the foreign investors, because now the additional buyer stamp duty increased by 10%. So right now it's a huge hefty 30%. So we're looking at the investment market and products in the core central region. We're looking at that kind of like not moving, not having a growth this year. But for the outer regions, we're still looking at a healthy growth of about 3 to 5%.
I think that's quite an interesting thing is, you've got those high-end places in the core central regions, which, they're going to, they don't have the demand coming in from overseas because of what are probably the most onerous taxes. Maybe some of the Scandinavian countries, have worse ones, but actually it's pretty impressive and bold move on the government's part. So, 30%, that's a big,
it came up from 20, so essentially a 10% hike, but
even at 20 is still, unprecedented in most countries.
So the number of foreign investors and foreign buyers for projects now have declined sharply. So really, the home market in Singapore is lifted by the genuine home buyers, Singaporean PRs. From my perspective, I work in the UK market. That's a great thing because we're getting a lot more inquiries from Singapore investors that are buying, in the UK, and places like Australia as well, which obviously, if you can tell the accent, I'm Aussie. So they're benefiting from this because there's nowhere else to go. It's not like Singapore investors can buy or would want to buy and spend that because 30%, say 5% growth a year, that's 6 years before you're back at zero. Whereas the UK, you might be 6-8% depending on what, stamp duty. Well, that's probably 2 years, but somewhere like London that's bouncing back now, you're probably going to get 10% growth potentially, you'll see when it bounces back. That can be paid off in 1 or 2 years you're away. And I think the other aspect is the availability of liquidity because, again, with this round of cooling measures,
we can take less loan.
Yeah.
Right? So the total debt servicing ratio has reduced to 55% for the first home. And if you want to buy a second home for investment, it's going to be harder and more difficult to take a loan. So probably looking overseas is the only thing they can do.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting, compared to overseas, it's a lot, you can get a lot higher loan to values, which means you can borrow more. You know, so it really is not attractive to overseas buyers, which is actually, I guess, what the strategy, certainly what the strategy is about. I mean, yes, they don't want the prospecting, you know, we're buying and flipping and that, which they've really got rid of that by, you know, the additional buyer stamp duties. But yeah, wow. You know, so for investor, it's not a good landscape for investing in Singapore property right now.
Not just yet. Yeah, I think so. So when investors take loans, do they take onshore or offshore?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, by far, there was a period where they would go onshore because the interest rates were a lot cheaper here. But for the most part now, probably 80 to 90% are taking them offshore through maybe like the HSBCs or that, so you can get outside the TDSR side of things.
Yeah.
You know, because that really did put a real dampener on the market. I mean, that's 5, 6, 7 years ago, maybe longer now. You know, I've been here for 10 years, so. But yeah, but I think, you know, investors right now, it's not the landscape for them to invest in, which is what the government wants. They want to hold prices down to get people on the ladder, you know, make it easier and not have house prices run away. So But so what about some of the other areas? What do you think is happening?
So right now we look inside Singapore, you know, where Singapore is kind of like drawn and separated into 3 areas, the core central region and the rest of the central region and the outside of the central region. So like we mentioned, the investors, usually they look at the core central region, which is, you know, the prime, the luxury region. So that is kind of slated to stay zero growth, I would say zero growth. And then the rest of central region, if you look at these lines and they're showing the PPI, really you can look at them climb up this way, right? So I think my take on that is that because the rest of central region, the prices are going up so high, as you can see, the gap between the luxury segment and the masses is really decreasing and it's getting smaller. So maybe you guys could take this opportunity and jump into the CCR.
Yeah, I think there's lots of opportunity, especially if you're buying your first property now. You know, it's a good time to get in. You know, there's always headwinds. There's always going to be inflation. Inflation's with us now all the time. There's always going to be interest rate potentially rising. There's always going to be, you know, potentially COVIDs, potentially, you know, recessions. All these things are always going to be present. But I think the government is run well. You know, the economy is working well. You know, and certainly as things start to open up, that will even get better. So that's, you know, it's a good time to. For me, I think it's a great time to get in and get on the ladder if you can. You know? So yeah. So how about new properties, new housing? Where's that at?
What about it? So let's see. I mean, a lot of things are happening, a lot of exciting things. We're seeing new launches this year. Although the volume is less, we're looking at about maybe 9,000 new units being launched. Okay. I mean, we closed 13,000 new units last year, right? So, and then there is still genuine demand from upgraders and home buyers. So, but because of the cooling measures and the lack of supply, so maybe new home volumes will decrease, will drop. But prices will be buoyant. Yeah.
Which I suppose is good news for those people that want to line up and wait for the new launches. Which it always blows me away because 10 years ago in the UK, people used to line up for launches, but we haven't seen that for years now. And whereas they still do it here.
Yes.
You know, it's amazing.
So like with Canning Hill Piers, with Jervois Mansion, and even the most recent Belgravia A's, which is cluster housing, within the launch weekend, they sold out like 90%. For Belgravia A's. For Jervois Mansion, it was 99%. It's just 1 unit left after the weekend. And essentially people sit there, they wait, they queue, they take ballot numbers. And then the prices are adjusted a few times in a day. But it also shows that there is demand for it and they believe in the projects. So there are good projects that people want to buy.
I think fundamentally Singapore is an island, it's a city-state island. And so it's got a limited amount of land. So, you know, and really the way we're not building down, so we've got to build up. And so, you know, and actually the government's very good with that in terms of, you know, taking down old buildings. You know, in the UK, we have buildings that are so freaking old, it's ridiculous.
and they just won't get rid of them, So I like the attitude here, and I think that really does show in a buoyant property market where the investors are educated, they're prepared to wait in lines, whether that be for food or property. Whereas I think UK, Australia, not so much.
Yes. And speaking of en bloc and renewing, there will be another en bloc cycle this year.
Yeah, gotcha.
Probably. Yeah.
It's interesting. Last cycle, just some of the land prices went for it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you've got to sit there and just step back and have a look at how they're going to make money. But then you realise that they're obviously they know their numbers. I think that's quite good.
And each en bloc hits a new record. Each new development.
Yep, it does. Yeah. And prices keep creeping up and creeping up. And I think in some ways we get this creeping up over time as opposed to this up and down, up and down, up and down, which the government doesn't want.
Yes.
Whereas in a lot of countries, like the UK, we get this up and down, up and down. Although actually, to be fair, in the UK we've had the down and then they sit along the bottom with austerity and all that sort of stuff. So we haven't seen the massive growth. Last year was a good year, but I think, it's interesting to see the two different markets operating and how they operate. And I think an active government that takes a proactive approach to pricing and a proactive approach to supply, and both from a developer's perspective, but also an end buyer's perspective,
and investors
actually works really well.
Because it's safe, I guess.
Whereas the government in the UK really, they've got no idea. I think we've had 7 different housing ministers in 6 years. So there's no continuity, there's no coordination, and basically it's almost like the wild, wild west. Even though that market is hundreds of years old, thousands of years old technically.
So where's the UK now then?
So the UK is an interesting one, because I think the UK, you can't, with a lot of these sort of things, you can't just say the UK, because the UK is a large island.
Yes, of course. Yes.
70 million people. And the reality is you've got to decide where you're talking about. If you're talking about London versus, say Manchester or Birmingham, which are major cities, versus the suburbs in the middle of nowhere, which, what we're finding is it all comes down to fundamentals. And it's a bit like here too. Your best areas are going to see your best growth. Same in the UK. You've got to buy where the fundamentals are, the shops, the schools, the transport, and major employers, major investment.
Yes.
And if you buy with those sort of things, and you buy in areas that are getting investment into them, then renewing themselves, then actually your property price growth will happen. But I think one of the problems is there's a lot of areas in the UK where the kids grow up and they're leaving, going to the cities. And so now the ageing population is becoming, massive in those areas, and there's no infrastructure. And so you don't want to really be buying in those areas unless they're in a commuter town, but again, that comes back to fundamentals. So I think really it's a two-speed economy or property market in the UK where you've got the areas that are being invested in that have the fundamentals, and the areas that the fundamentals are in decline, they're not the areas you want to get into. So where are they? Your cities now, your major cities. The thing with the UK is you now have London, Birmingham, Manchester.
Yes.
Some might argue Liverpool, Leeds, and a few of the secondary major cities. But really, for those three, London, Manchester, Birmingham, those 3 cities for me are world cities. They attract massive amount of inwards investment. And that's been very good, because actually the UK was run down for a lot of years. But we're seeing now it's picking up in those areas. Outside, not so much. So I think we're going to see growth this year. Again, probably similar numbers where we're looking at sort of 5%-ish around that sort of stuff. But London's going to come back, and that will form a higher portion of the increase. And I think it'll work well. Of course, we could go into recession, and that could drop 10% off the values. But what you tend to find is places like London, they'll bounce back quickly. So you might lose 10, but then you gain 12 the next year. So you haven't actually. It was a rough year, but you've gained it back. Whereas some of those areas, they'll drop 10 and they won't recover the 10.
Yes.
And that's where you don't want to be
investing.
investing.
You don't have any more influx of people coming in after.
There's no real demand, there's no real investment, there's nothing going for it basically. So it's you've got to pick your areas, and you've got to work with people. If you're sitting here in Singapore thinking about buying in the UK, you've got to find people that know the local areas, not necessarily people who are given a brochure and saying, look, this is great because A, B, and C. You really do want that, that knowledge on the ground, and do your research, like anything. So how about landed property then?
Landed property in Singapore. Again, very unique in Singapore. It's a little island and a finite amount of land, right? So, the number of landed housing in Singapore is not going to grow. it's either going to remain the same or reduce because there are people buying plots of landed houses and redeveloping them into apartments, right? So the prices in Singapore last year for landed housing grew by 10 to 10.5%. Which is quite a lot in a year. You know, there were 3,300 transactions, and the prices really were propped up by the GCBs as well. There were 33 transactions, and the highest record transaction was $4,200 per square foot. Yeah, so it changed hands at $63 million, including Hill. So yeah. Those prices are crazy. It's not a condo, it's like a house. It's a big house. But yeah, landed prices in Singapore are very healthy.
They're not going anywhere but up.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
yeah.
What's your summary? What do you think about the market?
I mean, even today, right, I had a couple of buyers and we were chatting and they're like, should I buy now? Should I wait? Should I continue renting? My professional point of view is that if you're looking to buy something, it would be probably prudent to take action sooner rather than later. Prices are still going to grow. So if you're going to like rent for another year, it's just another year of rental in that sense. But if you can afford to wait just because you're living somewhere, then maybe. But I think my take is to...
I think with the Singapore government, they've got all these cooling measures in place. If things started to downturn, they can always pull them off and stimulate the economy. I mean, unlike a lot of countries where, you know, they've got no room to maneuver, Singapore's got massive room to maneuver. So even if things start to, you know, the wheels start to fall off, they can, you know, pull back these cooling measures, you know.
Exactly.
The 4 or 5 rounds of them.
Exactly.
That they've had, you know. And that, you know, it's not, most countries will put them in and pull them off. Singapore has been adding and adding and adding. And
they have pulled them off. Yeah.
They have, but I mean, to be fair, you know, I've been here 10 years and all I've seen is really, you know.
Yeah, so on that point, right, like you said, if they start seeing a cooling off, they would pull it off. But they will do that before it even pulls off.
Yes.
So you can see a constant rise. It's just that they don't want it to rise it too fast. They don't want the prices to rise too fast, but you won't see a drastic downturn because they wouldn't let that happen.
No,
too much invested.
Right.
Yes.
And to be fair, that for me, that is the purpose of the government, that they should be doing that. And they've got, you know, the good thing is they've got the data available to them to see what's going on, what supply, what demand.
Yes.
And they can play with that, and they're prepared to, which is great.
Yeah.
You know?
So little measures that they can, you know, adjust.
So for me, I think, you know, in some ways, with a government like that, in the environment we're in, you know, with lots of manoeuvrable room to manoeuvre, there's no reason that you shouldn't be buying now and getting on. If you know, if you can afford it.
If you're looking to buy in Singapore, that is.
That's right. Yeah, definitely. You know, I mean, with other countries, you know, you might need to look at, you know, their individual circumstances and their individual economics and politics and you know, a whole range of things like that. But at least with buying in Singapore or in your own country, you kind of know that it's a known quantity. But I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make, is they go to the US, they go to Australia, they go to, you know, UK or whatever, but they don't realise that they've got to adjust the rules of the game, you know, that they're playing over there. So they can't apply the Singapore model to the UK or the US.
Right, yeah.
You've got to change.
You need your local knowledge, right? We need to like ask you, definitely.
100%. And that's where working with someone who knows that market locally, someone you can trust and build a relationship with is really important. But no, I think, you know, there's no real, from my perspective, there's no real, nothing in any of these reports, in any of the sort of stats that show that, you know, we're likely to see any of this.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we just come through COVID and not much happened. You know, in fact, prices increased.
Exactly.
And the governments are willing to stimulate the economy now, which I think is adding a new dimension that we haven't had, where they're giving money to the individuals. For many years, they've given it to corporate bondholders and things like that. But now they're willing to, you know, go to that another level, which is great. So yeah, I think it's pretty good. You know, good time to get involved. Because once you buy a house, you don't regret it. You know, you settle into that, that becomes the norm, and then you can look to how do we go from our BTO to our resale to our condo to our, you know,
hopefully
to our good
GCB.
cast bunda. Yeah. No, cool, awesome. Well, thanks very much.
Thank you.
So yeah. So guys, if you've got any questions or you've you know, or you want to obviously subscribe, like, you know, press the notification button. Brett's Property Rants, or else
Our homes in the Lion City.
Yeah.
See you in our next video.
Cheers guys, bye.
Bye.
See ya.